I'm Diane Burley, Chief Storyteller here at Coveo, and this is the Ecom Edge, a space where e-commerce experts, practitioners, and strategists hold illuminating discussions about their approaches to scaling and gaining advocates in a landscape dominated by retail giants like Amazon and, of course, demanding shoppers. Today's episode is Retail Commerce, the Next Generation. And here to help us sort through it all is Brian Kilcourse, Managing Partner and Principal Analyst for RSR Research, which provides industry-leading retail research and benchmarks to help companies throughout the retail ecosystem develop winning strategies. Brian, welcome.
Hey, nice to see you this morning. Good to see you.
Nice to see you as well. So one of the things I noticed on your website moniker is that you call yourself the candid voice in retail. What makes you so candid in retail? Where did that candor come from?
It comes from the fact that I am a retailer, and so are my partners. We come from the industry. And I will be frank with you and say that one of the things that I found so difficult about being a retail executive was trying to teach technology vendors in particular enough about our company so that we could then listen to their story. It was all about translating their value proposition in something that retailers, me and my fellows, could understand. And at first it was a challenge, and after a while it was just kind of irritating. Retail executives won't tell you that in the sales cycle. So we said, okay, let's just be honest with the industry, not talk about theoretical best use cases, which, by the way, nobody ever implements, and then instead talk about what really goes on in the retail industry. And that was our MO. We wanted to be able to share that kind of information with technology solutions providers, with partners of retail companies, and with retailers themselves in an honest and straightforward way.
Yeah, I found it's really interesting. Full disclosure here, you are doing some benchmark surveying for Coveo, and we'll be sharing some of those results throughout this today.
Yeah.
You do consult with brands that are retailers, but also brands that are purveyors to retailers. You share the whole, or you offer services to the entire ecosystem. How does that work out? Is it good? Does it conflict? How does that work?
Well, we make sure it doesn't conflict. And the reason it doesn't is because we don't share internal confidences. So you might talk to one of the big traditional research firms, an analyst firm, because you want them to say good things about you in their technology notes. So, for example, you're getting ready to launch a major new product line or a new solution set. And so you'd want those people from Forrester and Gartner and IDC to hear about those things because they then talk about you in the context of your competitive solution space. So they put you, it's about your ability to execute and the strength of your vision and those kinds of things. Everybody's very familiar with that. You talk to RSR because you're not sure what to do next. And so there's a fundamental difference there. As a result, everything that everybody says to us in these meetings is confidential. Now, the problems between technology solutions providers and retailers is a little different. For retailers, it's all about trying to understand what the other guy is up to. And we don't share that on a one-to-one basis. But as you know, we benchmark the industry continuously all year long. And so we can give them a sense of whether they're in front of the curve, whether they're behind the curve, or just out on a limb all by themselves, and try to help them to prioritize their roadmap to what the industry on the whole is doing. Now, to technology solutions providers, we tell jokes about this. I have yet to work with a technology company that doesn't think that their solution is the best thing since sliced bread. It's just.
I think they say it like that too. All the marketing seems to always say the exact same thing. We are the best since sliced bread.
We are the best. It's incredible because then they think that only an idiot wouldn't see the obvious value of their technology, and they're amazed at how many idiots there are in this world. So it's not really a question of intelligence. It's a question of language. Technology solutions providers and retailers speak a different language. So we try to help technology solutions providers speak the language of retail to be able to talk effectively to their targets.
Well, you and I have the same somewhat checkered past where we've been in media, we've been in technology, we've had tech executive roles, business executive roles. And I'm in a marketing position here at Coveo. And one of the things that you always have difficulty with is convincing people that retail executives need to learn the technology and the differentiators, and they can learn it. They're smart people.
They
These are
are.
people that are very learned, so they can handle the truth. Um, Give me an example of like a tech term that has crossed over into business lexicon that
Oh.
that everybody should know if you're on the business side, but might not. I mean, because you're new to it.
Well, I mean, we have a long succession of buzzwords. Cloud is a good one. Everybody uses the word cloud. The concept of cloud-based delivery systems for technology isn't really very new. What happened, however, is it became scalable and very robust and became the battleground for companies like Microsoft and Google and Amazon. For retailers, it seemed like they were losing control of their technology stack. So you had to explain to retailers, in fact, don't overstate what cloud is about, but don't undersell it either. Find the right path. And the right path is that you need to get to new technology solutions very, very quickly because technology has moved from the back office to the front, right up front and in center with the consumer. And therefore, what's the best way to do that? What's the best way to reach potentially millions of users of your technology? And cloud happens to be the right way to do that. But to sell it as the next thing since sliced bread is probably a mistake because they'll immediately say, "Oh, I've heard this before," and now you're on the defensive, and that's not a good place to be.
So we're here talking about retail e-commerce, the next generation, and there's been
Right.
some really interesting information in the news lately. Macy's is way up. Their sales are just, their share stock price has gone soaring, particularly in comparison to a year ago. Um, they have a huge retail footprint, and they're making great gains online. Maybe
Right.
tell us a little bit about your thoughts on that. And are they something that others should maybe look at and say, yeah, that's what we should do too?
Well, first of all, let's talk about Macy's in the last 12 years. Since the beginning of omnichannel, Mr. Lundgren was the CEO at the time, and he believed in omnichannel way before other retail CEOs did. And he invested in it. He invested heavily in it, and he was roundly criticized for it for a lot of years, because even in the 2010 2012 timeframe, retailers were still thinking of e-commerce as just a separate channel. They didn't have this notion that they were really creating a selling environment or a shopping environment for consumers that had equal parts digital and physical. He saw that way before anybody else. So when you see their new success numbers, it's important to remember that what preceded that was 12 years of really hard work. This just didn't happen overnight. They've been working at it forever. Now, there are other problems that the company has having to do with the physical stores, where they're located, and those kinds of things. And of course, we're all talking about supply chain nowadays. But the work that they've done to enable an omnichannel selling environment started years ago, and they're starting to bear fruit. They're not the only company. I mean, you can think of my favorite example is Walmart. Now, we talk about Walmart too much. But remember in 2016, the CEO of Walmart said to the stockholders, you have to expect flat earnings per share for the next couple of years because we're going to invest heavily in omnichannel shopping. And it was a brave move at the time. I admired his honesty, and it worked. They're ready for what happened in the next few years.
They were certainly ready to serve when COVID came around,
No kidding.
and everybody was sent scurrying to their computers to do their shopping.
Yeah.
Although their stores were still, in fact, I was not a Walmart shopper, and I found myself going to Walmart because it was something to do.
Yes. Well, I was an executive at a company that had the misfortune of having to compete with Walmart, and they are very, very aggressive. We were a big West Coast retailer in the United States, and they came across the Rockies and into our area, and it was tough. So from that time until COVID, I will confess to not having walked in a Walmart store except to see something that was pertinent to our research. But guess what? Now I'm getting Walmart boxes into my garage door for Christmas stuff. Isn't that funny?
It comes full circle.
It does. It
So,
does indeed.
so when we talk about omnichannel, are we talking about retail and digital, and is that still important? Because some of the noise that's also in the headlines today about Macy's is that there's a push by some of the newer investors to pretend perhaps bifurcate and separate the two different these channels and separate them into two different companies. Do you see that happening, and do you think that's a wise move?
Well, it's probably going to happen. I think it's a mistake. And we've been saying it's a mistake for a long time. It's important to remember that consumers don't see channels. So a silly example would be is if a retailer charged a buck more for a product in the online space than they did in the store, a consumer would notice that and they'd actually ding you. You'd lose a little bit of loyalty because of that, because they don't see the channel, they see the brand. The other thing is it's important to know that consumers begin many of their shopping journeys in the digital space, even when they fully expect to go to a store to fulfill it. Google published some numbers, I think, over the summer, if I'm not mistaken, that said something of like 64% of all shopping journeys begin in the digital space. That's a nice big number. I would expect that that might even be understated. Even people that are shopping groceries now are looking at the what's available. They're thinking about their dinners. They're thinking about their menu for the week. They're thinking about the best prices and the availability. They may order it to be picked up at the curbside, or they may go into the store themselves to fulfill the order. But they're starting it in the digital space.
But are they starting it in the digital space on a given brand? Is that where they're starting it, or are they starting somewhere else?
What a great question. And as a matter of fact, we saw some data in the research that we're doing for you that indicates, and this is bad news for retailers, that consumers start their shopping journey the majority of the time in one of two places. It's either Google or it's Amazon. And now they may decide to go to the local store, but they still start there. The problem with that is, of course, is that we as retailers invest heavily in being a destination for the consumer for whatever lifestyle issue they're trying to address. But to start at Google means you're whoever pays the most for SEO, right? It's going to end up at the top of the list.
So what do retailers do to combat that?
It has to be better than price and convenience is what it boils down to. And retailers know this. If you're fighting on the axis, the twin axes of price and convenience, I would conjecture that it's very, very hard to beat the supply chain masters like Amazon and Walmart, quite frankly. Target's really good at it too. So what's the point? Why would we go to a store? And we go to the store to experience something. And that's the edge that retailers have. We saw, we were doing some study before COVID. And if you'll remember the retail apocalypse, like 2015, 2016, there was a lot of Durham and Strang about stores just disappearing. And as a matter of fact, IBM still talks about this like it's a zero-sum game. So you lose a sale in one channel and you gain it in the other. We don't believe it's a zero-sum game. We think it's additive. So in 2019, by the time we did that study, we noticed that retailers had gotten over all their paranoia about losing their stores and had suddenly realized that their stores were the destination for a lot of consumers. As a matter of fact, over 72% of the time in 2019. And it was also for, I think, 64% of the time, it was the place where consumers got fulfillment for their digital orders. So the store was really, really important. The question is how to make that even more important so that it's value add. It's not something that you can see on a Google search, but you sure can experience it in a store.
So I read a stat, and I can't remember where I read it or who said it, but it was some bigwig, some CEO or something was talking about acquisition costs of customers, and that it's actually cheaper to have that customer coming in through a brick and mortar store than trying to secure that online. Does that sound correct to you?
Yeah, it does. It does. Well, first of all, retailers are expert at customer acquisition if you can only get them through the doors. So we've been doing this.
So how much inventory do you have to hold, and how much inventory, especially like with supply chain issues, and what do you do? I mean, we haven't really seen too many setups where the computer is there at the counter,
Yeah.
allowing a person to order online if it's not in the store. And the store assistants don't seem to help that way. So how can you create this omni-channel and bridge it together a little bit?
Okay, that's two different questions. Let's go back to the customer acquisition, because
I do that.
how many hours have you got? we can talk for a long time about this stuff. Customer acquisition in digital is anonymous. It's digital, so you can't in fact physically impress the consumer. So it's much harder, and there's a lot of competition for that consumer in the purely digital space. When it's tied to a physical space, you have way more opportunities. Now let's talk about the other side of this that you just raised. Okay, the stores. What about those stores? Well, in fact, the stores, generally speaking, aren't built for 21st century retailing. Here's your test. Here's how you can find out. When you walk into any retail store, where is the technology and who is it facing? So it's a good question. So let's take a typical grocery store. The technology is at the checkout stand, right? It's nowhere else. You don't see it anywhere else unless you see it in an order picker or something like that. So what are people doing at the checkout stand? They're checking out. They're leaving. You've lost your opportunity. Now, the other thing is who's the technology facing? Who's it looking at? And it's looking at the cashier. It's not looking at the customer. So I would conjecture that most retailers, if they have technology in the store, it's all about getting the customers out, but it's not about engaging with them in the store, in the aisle, in the dressing rooms. And those are the opportunities. The reason it's been so difficult to address is kind of twofold. First of all, there's a kind of a legacy technology stack that has to be overcome. And that's a real issue. People in my generation of retail technologists implemented distributed computing because the networks were so slow, really. And so those factors are changing, and it makes it possible to consider cloud-based solutions, for example, or content-rich solutions, those kinds of things. But they weren't available when we put those technologies into place. And the cost of replacing them is exorbitant. Just here's a simple example. Imagine your Walmart, and I don't know how many thousands of stores they have now, but imagine every store has 30 checkout lanes, and you decide you want to replace, you're the CIO, and you're going to replace the register printers in all of those stores. Because you're Walmart, you have an incredible ability to buy at low cost. So let's just say it's $150 per register printer. Real pedestrian stuff. Do it times 30 times the number of stores, and suddenly you're talking about millions upon millions of dollars. It's simple math. So we call this the store multiplier effect. And that is a big inhibitor to putting in new technology. Now, there is a solution, and the solution is right here in my hand. It's this lovely iPhone. And one of the things that's different in today's world from all prior times since the beginning of retail, which is a long time ago, it's that we now carry the store, essentially the equivalent of the store, in our pockets and purses all the time, 24/7. And we have access to any retailer anywhere. The entire world is our assortment. We have all this great information. So there's two opportunities here. First is you can empower the consumer in the store with the same technology she uses in her home, number one. Number two, and here's a novel idea, you can also empower the employee with the same stuff. So this is all great news for retail if they just embrace it. The challenge is it's network centric. And as I said earlier, a lot of stores to this day are network poor. They have very, very constrained capabilities. When I go to my local grocer, I live in a rural area in California, which ironically is less than 200 miles from where all this stuff was invented. They have the first thing, I have no cellular coverage.
I knew you were going there.
How does it get worse? We have almost no cellular coverage. And to get onto the wireless, we have to actually sign on. I'm happy to do that. So that I can start looking at recipes. I can look at related products. They know something about me, so they can help me make smart purchases. And it's a wonderful thing. And now the technology is in the aisle. They're now talking to me in an engaging way, in a way that makes sense to me, that's helpful to my shopping journey. And it's a better shop. I probably spend more.
I'm getting ideas as you are checking out. It'd be interesting to see like recommendations pop up at that point while you're at the
Why not?
checkout. Like, do you
Why
want
not?
this? And
Yeah.
by the way, we can drop it off at your house later today. So you don't have to even go back in line or go wait for somebody. Just if you want it, we'll deliver it shortly. That would be really neat. Apps. Are we still doing apps next year, or are apps starting to die out as we take on headless technology, which is another buzzword I think people should probably start thinking about?
Oh boy, but headless. Well, let's talk about that in a second. That's the latest buzzword in it, and it's. I was a developer, so I have to express great annoyance with the very term. There's another analyst. There's another analyst company that loves to invent this stuff, and we'll just leave that there. Um, the point is, can you get the right business rules and the right metadata to the right point in time to influence a person's decision, whatever that decision happens to be, whether it's to help a customer or to be a customer helping yourself, and through the interface of that person's choice. So is that headless? Well, we used to call this object-oriented programming, where there were loosely coupled front ends. Whether it's a voice interface or a mobile interface or a desktop interface or some other interface. I'm not sure why that should matter, but it does. It seems to matter for some reason.
I know it's like in radio, it used to be solid state and then it'd go back to, all the components. It's like, we just keep going in circles here. We go for convenience and easeability. We want everything woven together. And then you go, no, for more flexibility and agility, you got to take them all apart. So,
that's a perfect example of what we're talking about our value proposition to technology companies. This is a technology-driven term. Technology companies, it means something. It means how they develop their applications. Well, isn't that great? To a retail executive, why should they care? Why should they be forced to care to understand how you develop your app? What they need to know is whether it's flexible enough to get it to the right point at the right time. That's what they care about.
The importance of social channels. I know this is like during COVID, long days where I wasn't doing anything, laying in bed on my cell phone, and I'm making sourdough bread recipes and looking at people on Instagram and dancing and looking at dance, and up would come something and I'd be buying. I mean, I did more purchasing before I got out of bed in the morning than at any other time in my life. That tended not to be integrated within a retailer's tech stack. It was just a self-standing piece. We're starting to see that come together. And what is the importance of social channels come in next couple of years?
It's huge, in my opinion, and I base my opinion on my focus group of one, which happens to be my daughter, who is a mom with 3 young kids, and she lives in a rural part of Washington State. She happens to be an influencer for a company called So English, which sells fabric to people who like to make their own garments. And so I got my first experience watching this whole thing work. It's just fascinating. There's a live stream of her or one of her colleagues showing fabric and showing the patterns and showing what you can do with it. It's all exciting. It's a lot of fun. And then over on the side, if you like the fabric you see, you can click on it and it takes you to the website and you can then buy it. So that's a pretty good improvement. And it's a vibrant channel. It really works. Now imagine, instead of having to go to the website, you just start getting the business rules and the metadata right there in the stream itself, so that you can complete the purchase without having to jump into the website and then jump back to the Instagram feed. That's where they're headed. That's where this is all headed. Now, it may not be very interesting to people in my age group, but I can guarantee you that it's interesting to people who are just starting their adult lives.
Is that what your research found?
Yes.
Do you have any other research you've found recently that would be enlightening to our audience?
Well, you mentioned the supply chain, and we never even touched upon that. And the supply chain is an area of tremendous focus right now for retailers, but not just because of the current issues. The current issues are a result of demand and supply being out of sync with each other. That in the time that consumers were at home, sequestered because of COVID, instead of going out to dinner or going to see a film, they shopped in the digital space. And so there's this huge bolus of demand. Remember that
And they
COVID.
renovated their houses because they were stuck at
Sure,
looking at those
sure.
same walls.
Right. I mean, if you go to the Home Depot, you can see what the effect of that has been. So yeah, I mean, it's great. I think it's exciting. But remember that COVID happened in the places where all the products that they sell are made as well. So there's that issue. You have a supply issue and you have a demand issue. You have a bolus of demand, a huge uptick in demand. Challenges on the supply side, which prevent you from meeting that demand. And then you have the usual stuff. For example, ships can only go so fast over the Pacific Ocean. That's, Walmart solved that problem in the most amazing way. I just love their practicality. One of the reasons that the ships go into LA and Long Beach Harbor and overflow up into Oakland is because they're so big they can't get through the canal. And so what Walmart did is they leased ships that were smaller, the last generation of ships, which you can still get through the canal. And they go to ports like Miami, Charleston, South Carolina, places like that underutilized ports. And that's part of how they solve their problem. Now, another part of their problem is, of course, they're a big buyer. And so they can get priority shipping on just about anything they want. Retailers knew that supply chain was an issue before all of this occurred. And the reason it was an issue is because consumers are showing a tremendous amount of impatience to highly standardized and uniformly presented assortments. And why are they so tired of that? It's because they've done the research beforehand. The days of consumers just wandering through a big box store and saying, "Oh, I always wanted one of those," or I didn't know I needed one of those," and filling your basket up that way. I think those days are gone, or they're going very quickly. Now consumers walk into a store and they have a pretty good idea what they want, even if they haven't started filling out an order in the online space. So they don't want to crawl through 14 aisles just to get to aisle 15 where they know the item is. This has led in an interesting way to this notion of optimization of assortment or localization of the assortment. Now, localization of assortment is a great idea, putting the assortment in the stores that are most likely to sell to the local population. Kind of a return to the old days in a weird way, but with scale, with the scale that's available because of technology. The challenge for retailers is their supply chains were not built for that.
I want to emphasize something that you just
Yeah,
said.
sure.
So you're talking about decentralizing buying from a chain. So you're doing it at
Not
the local level.
necessarily. No, it could be centralized because you still want economies of scale. You have the ability to have it both ways. You don't have. It's not an either or thing. The challenge is that the supply chain systems for the people in my generation of retail technologists was all built around building to deliver a highly standardized assortment bought at the largest or the most economical order quantity and delivered in a uniform way to the greatest number of stores. So that's the opposite of what consumers are asking for in today's world. The question is, how can you still maintain those economies of scale, which have been delivered to the consumers in the form of a price reduction, and still offer a highly localized assortment at store level? That's a big challenge. And if I joke about this a lot, depending on how many cups of coffee I've had, I might say everything that we've done for the last 40 years needs to be replaced. Everything. That's not actually true, but it certainly has to be changed. And that brings up a whole different subject, and that's the whole notion of Internet of Things with a digital twin and all of those interesting technologies. AI becomes a really big play here. We've been studying all of those things. So it's very, very interesting times to be a retail technologist.
Aside from supply chain, the next thing is the tech stack. Now, you've developed a methodology that you work with your clients called the boot methodology. Why don't you go into that a little bit? Because when you're talking about some of these are systemic changes, some of them are somewhat obvious, and you can, like, if you're going to do retail experience, you probably have a retail team, they're focused on it, and you're not introducing necessarily a lot of other departments into that ecosystem.
Right.
But a lot of things when you're talking about merchandising or buying, you're all over the place. So how does that work? And I know the boot methodology is something you work with your clients to try and figure out where the pitfalls and obstacles are going to be.
Yeah, so it's deceptively simple. Boot simply means this. It's business challenges. That's the B. It's opportunities. That's O. The other O is organizational inhibitors. And finally, T is technology enablers. It's intended to reveal the business use case for the adoption of technology. We don't believe that the world needs another voice saying technology A is better than technology B. There's so much verbiage on that, and it's all great stuff, by the way. But you don't need another research organization saying, "Hey, you should buy this because it's better than that." First of all, when I was a CIO, I never made a decision ever based on an analyst research report. Basically, what I did with those is I would look at those things to understand who to send the RFP to. But the discussion, I hate to be so crude about it, but is kind of simple. I would sit with my CTO and I'd say, this is a $50 million decision. And if we screw this up, we're going to get fired. What's your recommendation? And my job was to go out and get money and time, right? That's what I did for a living. So we try to understand what the business use cases that drive adoption. And the business challenges are simply those external things that are pressuring a retailer to change in some fashion. What we've noticed is that overperformers, and we call them retail winners, uniformly take those challenges and turn them into an opportunity. So some sort of a market constraint can be turned into an opportunity. And a great example is the one I already mentioned, Walmart in 2016, when the CEO said, we're going to address this omnichannel phenomenon. We're going to turn it into part of our value proposition to consumers, and it's going to cost a bunch of money to do it, but we're going to do it. So they turned what was a challenge for the entire industry into an opportunity for them, and they did a fabulous job at it. And as we already mentioned, Macy's, you have to give them credit. They've been at this pretty consistently for a long time. The opportunities are just what I mentioned. The organizational inhibitors are those things that happen inside the company that even when you understand the challenge and you can see the opportunity, you still don't act. And the question is, why is that? Why don't you do that? And it typically falls into the people, process, and technology stack. That's actually part of the more interesting aspects of our study. And then finally, what are the technology plans that retailers have to address the challenge or the opportunity?
Is that the sort of the last mile, perhaps? But there's the people processes can definitely be huge impediments to actually getting the technology.
Oh, yeah.
You can have a lot of really smart people within your organization who are saying we have to do this, and you can have one person who decides to be the goalie and keep the puck out of the net. So
It's just so true. Good analogy.
if we're going to give people a list of 3 things they must do this year in 2022 to stay active in the retail space, what are those 3 things?
Well, the first one I would say is it's actually not a new recommendation for us, but it's one that we think still has value, is that you need to know what you want the customer to experience. You need to design the customer experience. Now, the customer experience kind of comes out of the ground, right? It just happens. But it may not be what you wanted or what you planned. Now, here's a real simple example, what I mean by that. When you get onto a site, again, like Walmart, the very first thing you're hit up with is item and price, bang, bang, bang. And they want to get you to commerce, the commerce aspect of the transaction very, very quickly because they know that that's what their customers want. They've thought it through. When you go to the other extreme that I mentioned the other day was Burberry. Burberry wants you to experience the goodness that is Burberry. It's chic, it's classy, it's hip, it's expensive, it's all, and they actually want you to understand that. So they take you through an experience on the website. And you can finally get to the commerce side of it. But what they really want you to do is they want you to go to a store and experience the Burberry experience. So you need to understand what it is that you're trying to sell your customer. And you're not just trying to sell products, you're trying to sell experiences and you're trying to sell a solution to a set of lifestyle needs. Do you know what those are? Do you know what the customer wants to experience? Do you know how you can create, if you will, a loyalty around that brand concept? So you need to start there. That's number one. Number two is one of the biggest inhibitors that retailers face in addressing this notion of a selling environment rather than selling channels is you need to break down organizational barriers. Retailers are highly siloed for a whole bunch of reasons. And one of them is that these channels developed independently of each other, and therefore they may have whole different technology stacks, whole different even merchandise management stacks, and different arrangements with different vendors. Those silos need to be rectified. The best thing I would suggest that you do is that you have a tiger team of a line of business leaders whose job it is to break down those barriers. That's number two. Number three is you have to start developing a technology roadmap that moves information to a strategic position as opposed to the tactical position that it is currently in. Remember, it's not because retailers are short-sighted or mean. It's because this is where they started from. Technology started, it counted the beans. That's what it was supposed to do. And the very first things that we ever implemented in a retail operation was a general ledger. And just count the transactions. But information has strategic value. And the perfect example of that is what consumers are doing every day with these digital things that they're carrying around. It's just amazing. So the future is digital, and that roadmap needs to reflect that, if you will. I'm trying to avoid saying the digitalization of the organization, but really that's what we're talking about.
And we're going to have to let that candid comment be the last one for this episode. I hope you come back and do another one with me. It's always a lot of fun.
Thank you for asking me.
And thank you again, Brian Kilcourse, for joining us today.
Thank you for listening. To hear more, subscribe to the Ecom Edge podcast today. Listen to us wherever you get your podcasts.